All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Modern Revolution. Thank you for joining us. Glad you decided to listen to another episode. As you know, we invite guests here, and we don't spend a lot of time telling you why you should listen to them. Instead, we encourage you to listen deeply. And then if those ideas resonate with you, then we're going to tell you how to learn more about them. But here in the Modern Revolution, these folks are bringing new ideas to the world. They're affecting things that are not just for themselves and not just looking to change their own small sphere of influence. Instead, they want to bring their ideas to the world. So as such, I'm lucky to have some time with Mr. Josh Dech. Thank you very much for joining us. Josh, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Peter.
And so, Josh, as we talk about, the things that people are spending their time with, their energy with, I try to ask them to frame it in response to this question. What problem in the world are you trying to tackle?
The biggest issue I see going on right now, because everybody has different interests, and that's what I think makes the world very interesting.
Right.
But the one thing that piques my interest above all else is gut health.
Okay.
Now, the word gut health is sort of taken into context in a lot of places. Maybe we go, well, yeah, it's important not to be bloated. But I don't think we truly understand the depth of our guts. And so that's the number one thing I want people to understand. That's really my mission. And if I could frame that for you here, Peter, think about it this way. I often say that our gut bacteria are more important than our own DNA, which is a pretty large step considering DNA is like the thing that makes us us.
Right.
But think about this. You have 23,000 genes in the entire human genome.
Okay.
You have 3 million different genetic components in your gut bacteria alone. It's 130 times more.
Right.
Your gut bacteria, when you look in the mirror, you're looking at 20 to 30% is your own self, your cells. What are you? The rest is all bacteria and parasites and fungi and all kinds of stuff. Your gut bacteria outnumber your own cells 10 to 1. Inside your bacteria, there are viruses outnumbering them 35 to 1, then fungi and yeast and all these different things that communicate with every aspect of every bit of our being. They even will determine how your genes and DNA are expressed. And so when I say our gut, it's not just gut health. Our guts really are the center of all things everywhere. And if we don't understand really the basics of a reverence, we could be losing on a lot. I mean, our guts are directly connected to 93% of the leading causes of death in the United States.
Yeah.
That's 14 out of 15. The 15th cause is either homicide or accident of some kind. It's like an injury. And so, I mean, every single thing, the top 14 things we're calling natural causes can come back directly to your gut, which means with our gut, we have the power to prevent 93% of the leading causes of death in the United States. And that's my message.
You said an awful lot there, and I appreciate
So
you
much.
distilling it down. You did say so much. And when I learned about, what we're calling the gut, right? The first word that stayed with me, getting me to think about the gut non-conventionally, is the enteric nervous system. And that was a new term to me. And I learned that there are more neural cells in our intestinal tract than there are in our brain. And so that was a surprise to me. And it was also a surprise to learn that there is more DNA that we're carrying around in our microbiome and probably everywhere else than there is in the human being. So it kind of calls into question what is the humanness of our humanity in some senses.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about the consequences of not being able to attend to this aspect, as 14 of the top 15 ways in which we die have a direct relationship for that. And I want you to tell us about that. But this is a little bit esoteric, the choice to focus on a gut. So gut health, can you tell us a little bit, was the decision to spend your energy and your time on helping people improve their gut health something that occurred to you in the moment of epiphany? Or did it come to you incrementally over time? Like where did you flip to like, okay, this is in fact my mission?
Yeah, it definitely was a happy accident that sort of happened over time to me. And I often say, people say, well, everything happens for a reason. I think that's bullshit. I don't think things are pre-planned necessarily in every aspect of our lives, but I think everything can have a purpose. And I really do think that's what happened here. My first career when I was about 19, I started as a paramedic and I really enjoyed it. But I realized pretty quickly it was sick care, not health care. I was picking up the same people for the same conditions, for the same heart disease or strokes or diabetes and other things. I'd take them to the hospital. They'd either get more of the same medication or a new medication. They get sent back home. I'd see them a couple weeks later until one day they just stopped calling because they died.
Right.
And so sick care wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a glorified taxi for the, which is
Yeah.
basically what it was a lot of the time. If it wasn't trauma, it was just sick care. And so I ended up leaving that job. I was traveling across Canada a bit, trying to find new jobs as a paramedic where I could do more trauma and like really be needed. And I ended up here in Calgary, Alberta, getting a job as a personal trainer because my license wouldn't transfer. So it was just this happy accident. I've been in
Okay.
fitness for, years anyway. I thought, well, I'll just do it professionally for a bit. And when I got involved in my early 20s, one of my first clients who came to see me, her name was Lynn. She was 57 years old at the time. And we started working together. She was taking 17 pills and insulin for breakfast, 9 pills and insulin for bedtime. She had high blood pressure, borderline congestive heart failure. She slept with a CPAP machine. She was on the disability list at work. She had all these things going on. And when we started together, she was very, very sick, 57, just 2 years' time, age 59, after working on her health, her food, her exercise, her daily habits, all these things. She no longer needed CPAP. She was off the disability list. She was off all medications except for two, which were because of a surgery she had. And now, age 59, she broke her first world record as a weightlifter
Oh
in
my
the raw
goodness.
powerlifting division. And she kept breaking records till she was 61, 62. Most of them were hers by that point. And it was just amazing to see the capacity of the human body. And so I got more interested. I started looking a bit outside of that to depression, anxiety, skin issues, acne, psoriasis, all these different little things, diabetes. And every time we got back to it, came back to nutrition. But one of the side effects was the gut. And so I started to wonder, well, how much of a role does the gut really have to play in these conditions? And so I started looking at irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, and I started correcting a lot of those cases that the doctors just said, well, it's a functional problem. Here's your drugs and be on your way. And everything always tied back to the gut. And I thought I was like revolutionary. I'm going to break medicine. Turns out people have been looking at this for 50 years. It's just mainstream now. So I'm not
Yeah,
as
yeah.
smart as I thought I was, right? But as I started diving into this, I thought there's more to it. I went back to school. I became a nutritionist or a holistic nutritionist. And I started getting into the gut space. And I saw more and more severe cases as time went on. I eventually got my first case of inflammatory bowel disease, which is that Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, where
Okay.
it's debilitating. You're talking 30 to 50 bowel movements a day sometime with
Oh my
blood
God.
and pain and mucus. Like it's horrible. It's very crippling. Ruins relationships and work and all kinds. Um, and we turned them around very, very quickly. And then I just started specializing. I'm like, well, these people need the most help. And I'll tell you, Pete, looking at the stats, right? Inflammatory bowel disease, I look at it as a decline, right? Someone who starts today with a bit of bloat, indigestion, irritability, food sensitivities, it's a slippery slope, like wear and tear. If you're wearing a pair of shoes without socks and it rubs that heel raw till it
Yeah,
blisters and
right.
bleeds, right? The same thing until you have these bowel diseases. The Western world says, well, it's autoimmune. There's nothing we can do. It's idiopathic, meaning no known cause, or it's genetic or environmental, just, whatever, here's the drugs. And hopefully, we don't have to cut out your colon if you respond well to drugs. Well, here's the reality of it. We have this progressive disease process. We know 93% of the leading causes of death in the USA are gut connected. We know that there's this wear and tear process that goes from one severity to another severity of gut disease. Well, to say it's idiopathic, right? No known cause. Here are the numbers. We're talking back in 1990, right? There were 3 million cases of inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's colitis worldwide. So the biggest severity of gut disease, 3 million cases. Today, there's 7 million cases. More
Right.
than half of those are in the United States alone.
Yes.
And they're just 5% of the population. So when 5% of the population has 63% of the disease, and you're telling me it's idiopathic, meaning no known cause, I'm like, dude, you better figure it out pretty fast. And so that to me is really what we're looking at, this happy accident, how I fell into it. There
Right.
was a need. Everything just sort of transitioned. I saw this need. And then statistically, I'm like, everything medicine is doing makes no sense. It does not add up. The math doesn't make sense. And now we're fixing people left, right, and center. It's actually I've been blessed enough to get a position as a medical lecturer a couple of times a year with Priority Health Academy. It's a functional medicine school for medical doctors who want to leave the traditional Western system and learn functional medicine. And that's what we do now. We teach and coach and help people fix their guts.
So, I mean, it's sort of like obesity, right, in the United States, and that obesity made a
Mm,
shift about 1980. And the DNA of the human beings in the United States did not change in 1980. And yet at 1980, we see this, this rapid increase in obesity. So when you talk about these conditions, what are some of the status quo pieces of our environment, the things that we might not be even questioning, but they're just kind of present that are moving people into these disease states? Like
mhm.
these conditions are accelerating in both number and severity, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know if I can pull the numbers right off the top of my head,
Oh,
but
you're very right, yeah.
right, 1980 today, we tripled our obesity rate. We're spending $388 billion in the United States on diabetes. These were not the same issues of, from 1900 to 1980. So what's going on? What's the status quo in our environment that's making this happen?
Mm. It's interesting because the status quo, I think, is consistently changing, but the one consistency is money. It's
Okay. Yes.
lobbying,
Yes.
right? It's
Mhm.
FDA, it's pharma, it's insurance, and it really does. When you start diving into it, it's very incestuous. When you start looking at who owns what, who pays off who, when we start diving into where the money's coming from, if we even look at, so there's three major health associations, we'll say in the United States, right? That we can look at as sort of our big overarchers. So number one is going to be the ACS, or the American Cardiac Society, the American Heart Association, rather. We have the Diabetes Association. So ACS is the American Cancer Society. So you have cancer, heart, and diabetes, and they're accepting millions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies. So
Mhm.
Pfizer, Merck, Lilly, Johnson and Johnson, Abbott, right? All kinds.
Mhm.
And there's hundreds of billions of dollars spent on pharmaceuticals every year. And so these organizations that are supposed to be there, the Diabetes Association, the Heart Association, the Cancer Society, supposed to give us the information we need, they're not really, right? I mean, we look at the industry, I mean, these associations are accepting money from Kraft Foods, Oscar Mayer, Tyson Chicken, Dannon, Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell, Subway, all kinds
Right.
of food producers.
Yes.
And what happens with everything when money gets in the way of science is we have a bias, we cherry pick data. And so these major societies, cancer, heart, diabetes, are effectively being lobbied to say, well, this food's not that big a deal. That food's not that big a deal. We have cancer rates. We're celebrating now in modern time because we go, well, look how much people are surviving cancer. We're doing amazing because people survive cancer
Yeah.
more than ever, but more people are getting cancer than ever before. And so we actually break down the data for a country in the USA that spends $4.5 trillion a year right now on healthcare. Four and a
Yeah.
half trillion. That's enough to
Right.
buy most small countries.
Mhm.
And we're looking at this, and our death rate is actually, or the age of death is actually decreasing. Like we're dying younger and younger. And it's because people are sort of normalizing the status quo we've accepted is, well, it used to be sick after 60, sick after 50, sick after 40, joint pain after 30. And we start to just accept these slow declines as time goes on, which is nonsense because it shouldn't be. Look at what we have today, right? Our nursing homes are full of sick people with dementia and joint pain and liver disease and all kinds of issues. But you go over to countries who still eat off the land, who don't eat processed, refined foods, seed oils, sugars, and sugar substitutes, and corn seed this and corn syrup that. They have elders. We have elderly, and that's a very big distinction to
Yeah,
look
that's
at in the
interesting.
health
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things that you said there that interest me a lot. And one is like, in terms of what underpins, when you say money, I mean, there's a lot of different powerful forces in play. There's agricultural forces. That's like, what are we growing? And then what are we doing with that food? There are food processors where, if you are thinking of the human being as like has a limit to the number of we used to think there was a limit to how much food you could sell a human being
Mm,
over the course of a year. And then we realized, well, we can refine food into 800 calories in a 44-ounce drink. And that's a business decision that kind of amplifies the ability to increase your marketplace, right? So now instead of people consuming 800 calories a day, you're now selling them 3,500, 4,000, whatever the number might be, right? And then you have a counterbalance of like, well, the sick care industry, as you describe it, right, is in need of patients. And so if you are in need of patients, if you're telling them what we're going to do is change your diet and have you go down and eat, off of your farmers markets tables, all those fresh foods and whole foods, versus we're going to sell you this medication month after month. Those are two different economic incentives, and the incentives for the to go buy broccoli and fresh fruit down at the farmers market is a lot less powerful than the rheumatoid arthritis patient who's spending $10,000 a month on their medication. So I think you described a lot of status quo forces that are awfully powerful and not so easy to see, because when you go to your doctor, the doctor's the authority, and the doctor is saying, well, you know what? Rather than begin with the process of let's talk about your lifestyle, we're going to talk about, well, you came here to get fixed, and this medication is the fix. So I imagine that when people come to see you, you have to reframe their relationship to these things. And so what kind of assumptions do people bring to you that you have to push back against to move them in their direction of healing their issues?
It's a really interesting question because one of the biggest things that I see is we're often looking for loopholes in the system. We're often looking, I actually used to work with a lot of diabetics and I actually stopped because it was just, I don't have the patience as a clinician to deal with that mindset of, well, what if I have this or what about that substitute and the cheating and this and that? I'm like, just get better, do the
Right.
things and get better. And so we're always looking for substitutes. I mean, you mentioned calories. 50 calories looks a lot better than 50 ingredients. And so people
Yes.
always come in and ask me, well, what can I have as a substitute for pop? Or can I have this as a sweetener? Or I found this, carb-free bread. I'm like, if it's carb-free bread, it's not bloody bread. Right? And there's a great saying. It was Ben Azadi who actually said it. I'm not sure if it came from someone else. That's Keto Camp Ben Azadi. He says, human beings are the only creatures on earth smart enough to make their own food and stupid enough to eat it. It's so good.
That's a nice little turn of a phrase. Yeah.
Right, because we look at like what the FDA does with the lobbying and food producers and mega corporations saying this is fine, that's safe. We're adding chemicals. There's 5,000 plus new chemicals added every year to our food supply. And it goes on to a list called GCS, or generally considered safe, which means innocent until proven guilty. Well,
Right.
all these
Yes.
diseases and deaths and all these things we correlate, like we know they're a problem. Like trisodium phosphate, it's an ingredient in rat poison. Why do we need that in Lucky Charms? Why do we need a cleaner in Lucky Charms? Or, certain bromine-based chemicals used in fire retardants. Why do we need that in Mountain Dew? Or why does McDonald's in the UK have 3 ingredients in French fries, potato, salt, and whatever vegetable oil they use? Why do we have 17 in America? What is going on with our food supply and the FDA where we have these additives and these ingredients because they're cheaper,
Right.
right? There's more money in fake food. There's very little money in real food, but it's also a great business model because you sell things that make people sick and then you sell them the solution through a drug to mask that symptom. And
Yeah.
then that masks more symptoms, which creates more issues, which then need more drugs for. Now they're on subscriptions. And so what I really need to shift people's mindset of is to move away from food being a treat or food being fun or food being social. Every culture on earth has socialization around food, dinners with families. But we look at it as like, well, it's just a treat. I deserve this. Well, it's just one Starbucks Frappuccino. I'm like, there's 200 grams of sugar in that. There's
Right.
50 milligrams of caffeine. Like you're going to give yourself a heart attack and diabetes. And so we just need to understand that food is fuel, number one. Number two, if we're constantly trying to really sort of celebrate ourselves with food rather than experiences, we're going to constantly be putting ourselves in a place where we're prone to get sick, where we are unable to have experiences because we're at home with disease. Right? It's just so much shifting that needs to be done around fake food. And that's really one of the biggest things I see with people that I do see in my clinic or my clinical
And
practice.
I have an opinion that, like, let's say you don't change the attitude of I need food present in my life in all these different ways, but you don't change the attitude to that. However, you change the behavior that says, well, when you decide to do that, it has to be real food and whole food. I think that over time, the person who even says, well, this is how I celebrate my small victories. This is how I kind of make my way through the day. If that person is eating whole foods and real foods, I think that behavior changes anyway. Because my opinion about the fake food is that it has more in common with drugs than it does with food. And so when you have that frappuccino or you have that, it's not what's going on in that moment. We take disease out of the picture. It's not just about what goes on in that moment, but it leads the body to look for the next thing, gives
Mhm.
itself this rapid increase of feeling that has a, equally rapid decline. And that looks for, in my opinion, it looks similar to drug seeking behavior. And
Yes.
that isn't the same if you have an apple, like it isn't the same if you have a date, even like something as sweet as anything that, in nature that's available. But I think their relationship to that behavior would change even if they, in the beginning, just switched it to a different food. Now, I'm not saying I'm right. That's just an opinion I have based on my own experience. Like I consider myself a pretty careful eater, but I know at night that if I have things that are sweet in nature, I look for them immediately following my completing of eating those.
Mhm.
Where if I have something, uh, for me, if it's tart, or sometimes I'll have even apple cider vinegar as a way to kind of tell my body we're done eating. Like we're past the time in which it makes sense. Because so much of this information is coming to us via authorities, the Food and Drug Administration, our physician, what we see on television so often, and that these massive power structures exist as things that are ostensibly to protect us, right? The Cancer Association, the Diabetes Association saying, metformin does this and these treatments do that, as opposed to saying, well, let's look at the root causes of these things.
Mhm.
Um, when people come to you and you challenge that the personal assumptions, what in what ways do they not see this as serious as it is? In
Mhm.
some ways I think they may like, hey, come on, like relax. I'm just I just want you to tell me, like, can I have Taco Bell like once a day, once every other day? I mean, as opposed to what you said, like, well, no, this choice is laying the foundation for, you to shorten your life. And I think shortening your life is less of an issue than your health span versus your lifespan, right? Like you
Mhm.
want compression and morbidity. You want to be active, 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 fully functional, and then die, right? You don't want to get sick for 20 years and sit in a home in a chair where someone gives you medication and just keeps you with us. You want to be as vital, I would
True.
assume, as possible. So anyway, I mean, because you're up against these massive power structures in these conversations, do people sometimes think that you're crazy? That like, hey, you're going overboard, buddy?
Oh, all the time. I mean, I get called a quack, I get called all the classic things. Those are words that were actually invented by the CIA, fun fact. Even
That's
conspiracy
interesting.
theorists, right? That the word conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the CIA. It might have come shortly after JFK, just to really debunk anybody who said the government could be up to no good. But we all know unquestionably, it's become a joke and a lot of the butt of many jokes that politicians are corrupt. Okay. That's just the way it is. We know they're corrupt. They say one thing and nobody will debate that. Very few people, I should say, will ever debate politicians are corrupt. But then we look at these organizations which are lobbied by and run by politicians, and we say, well, they can't possibly be corrupt. And so it's really interesting. We look at this and go, well, I trust these people in this context, but I don't trust them in that context. Like, would you trust a thief on the street? Probably not. Would you trust him in your home? Suddenly you're like, yeah, he's in my house. It's fine. Like you're letting him in. He's going to take more from you. And so I look at the same way with these organizations. Like the closer they get and the more reach they have, the more they're going to take. That's really just the way it is. And so contextually it matters. And so it's really making these little small steps, but we look for small loopholes in these steps. We say, well, eating this particular food, which red dye 40, for example, great one. We say, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. Well, you're right. That's true, right? If just because it's correlated doesn't mean it's at the root. But back in the 50s, 60s, obesity was like 14%, and now it's 40% is considered obese.
Right.
70% of America is considered overweight. Meanwhile, 72% have gut issues. There's a correlation there as well. And so we can't say it's the root cause. It's often multifactorial, but we're often taught now or conditioned, well, show me the double blind, randomized control trial from XYZ with a non biased vote on X and whatever, and then we'll believe it maybe. But if it doesn't match our narratives, we put ourselves in these echo chambers and we put ourselves in the crowds of people who already agree with us. We don't challenge ourselves, which is very, very dangerous. I mean, there was a great quote, I forget who it was, but it says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot unlearn and learn. And so we're constantly sort
Mhm.
of working uphill on the
Yeah.
marketing, on the branding, on the silencing, political silencing in the media, or deplatforming. Like Dr. Joseph Mercola, he talks
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
nutrition and food and all these things and how this can cure disease. And he's been deplatformed. He's been shadow banned. He's had his content pushed down in the algorithm. And so, people will say, well, what like you talked about, can I have Taco Bell once a day, once a week? What's the thing? How would you treat an addict if an addict came to you,
Yeah,
cocaine
that's right.
addict, and was like, well, is it okay if I have a bump just once a week? You're like, no, dude, stop. Right?
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah,
But if
I mean,
everyone was on cocaine, we go, well, it's normal. Well, everyone eats fast food, so it's okay. So is it once a week? Fine. Like, no, none of it's okay. Everyone's got a problem, and we need to recognize it.
yeah, and I don't I mean, for me, a lot of the people are the walking well. Like, they're not diseased at the moment, and they don't really know how well they're supposed to feel. And so consequently, I think a lot of those conversations go on in the context of, like, the pleasure of that, fast food experience versus, the effort of, like, having to plan and prepare to figure out how do you get through your days in a way that you're comfortable. Because I think many practical reasons why all the fast food industry has thrived so much are rational, inexpensive. It's available. It is in fact fast, right? And so
Mhm,
in the busy course of a day, in between the morning and the night, you're likely to need to eat. And so, well, how are you going to satisfy that? And the planning and preparation that goes along with, like, how do you take care of yourself in a regular job where you're sitting a lot of the day, and your time to go attend to, you know, food and so on and so forth isn't exactly luxurious. You need to have a short amount of time, and people are bringing donuts and all the rest of it. I mean, these are pretty powerful forces. So it's I think they're rational choices, like, um, minus the understanding of the consequences. Because if we replace fast food with drug conversation, like you said, well, what do you say to the cocaine addict? All right,
mhm,
once a week, it's okay. Don't worry. You can do what you want, as if that doesn't affect the other 6 days. So, so it's a we're all living in a system that's pushing us in ways that don't particularly serve us, that serve but there are things to do. You're a healthy person, you're helping other people get healthy. You had a 57-year-old who surely had grooved in habits.
mhm.
It's not like you're dealing with a teenager. This person's habits surely were developed over decades. If someone's listening and they go, all right, I understand in principle, not quite sure what I would do to start. What's a small step they could take to kind of move in the direction you think they should go to? If maybe they're really sicker than they realize, or maybe they're pretty healthy, eating pretty well, but they want to protect themselves. What are some things that small behavior changes people could think about?
Yeah, it's interesting because some will say small changes are better. Some will say go cold turkey. It's just like that. Like, you cut the coke addict down from 7 days a week of snorting to 6 days. Does that
Yeah,
help?
right.
Right? Like, how do you wean off? Do you go cold turkey? Do you get yourself into a treatment recovery? And a lot of it really isn't so much about the small changes. Because really, if you look at somebody who goes, well, I'm going to make small changes to anything, you're never actually successful. You up here are
Mm,
always holding yourself back in some way. And so I used to be on board with the small changes. I really did. But now it's less about the small changes in your behaviors as it is small changes in your mindset that will one day radically
okay.
shift your behaviors.
Okay.
Right. Like, think about it this way. Dr. Stefan Neff actually says it really well. He says, the way we live our lives, he says, whether it's our food, it's whatever, we're committing suicide in installments, which I think just hits
Yeah. Yeah.
home,
Yeah. Sure.
right? Every bite of this, every drink of that, we go, well, I just want to live my life. I'm like, that's fine. If that's what you deem as living your life, is that experience of having that latte, perfect. For me, it's
Right.
having energy to go through my day, to have that mental clarity, to have the peace of mind knowing I'm not going to get sick or catch a virus or get these diseases. That to me is my peace of mind. And
Yeah.
so you can't shove anybody. You ever try to push someone into doing something, they become more resistant. And so for me, what I would tell somebody who goes, well, I'm interested, but I don't know. Don't worry about making the changes in your behaviors day to day. Work on the changes in your mindset. Expose yourself to one thing
Yeah.
every day for
Yeah.
5 minutes, 10 minutes, listen to a fragment of something with someone you actually disagree with. Start, bringing in different opinions or contradicting opinions to just figure out something a little bit different that pushes you a little bit closer until you're ready to make those choices for yourself. Because, 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I was all about this. 10 years ago, I was all about this, but I don't even microwave my food anymore.
Right.
Right. And so to me, my behaviors changed incrementally when my mindset shifted automatically. And that was the big one because what I
Yeah.
believed then, I thought, well, I'm eating healthy now. I'm eating my calorie intake now. That was good enough for where I was at. As
Right.
I started to learn more, I was like, well, sugar is actually the absolute worst. Like it's been lobbied in and we're pushed to eat it. And now I'm at the stage on the far end of the spectrum, like tinfoil hat. I'm like, the government says go left. I run as far right as fast as I can.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a good friend who's a very accomplished strength and conditioning coach for, professional athletes over the years, and he's got a very similar disposition. And if he was listening, he would agree with you 100%. I really think it's interesting what you're talking about in terms of like working on shifting your mindset versus your behavior, because I think about, as you're talking, I'm thinking about things that I do now that are a reflex for having changed my mindset. And
Mhm.
examples of that are this. 10 years ago, I stopped using anything that put scent on my clothes in the dryer. So like a
Yes.
dryer sheet or whatever, because my mindset shifted that, like, I know that that disrupts my body, probably my hormones, and that, do I like, is it worth it to have neutral smelling clothes versus clothes in which a scent is put on in the dryer if if it's affecting my body negatively? I think about a deodorant. I spend more money on a deodorant that I know has no aluminum in it, because I know that in principle that does something bad to me every day.
Mhm.
And so I spend slightly more on a deodorant that I don't give up deodorant because I frankly like having deodorant. However, I have found an alternative to something and I found that if I didn't, as I was in conflict, my mindset had already shifted, that like every time I was doing it, and I like that notion of like, well, you're committing suicide just slowly over time, as though that's a very draconian like language. I think d- diseases accrue over time. You're dropping pennies in the jar of either disease or health, and it shows up it shows up later as like something debilitating, or that your vitality is extraordinary over a long period of time. So
Well,
that
we
I that
ignore it though. Right. So
yeah, yeah,
if I can
yeah,
interject, we ignore it
please.
because we don't see it.
Yeah,
Right. It's like the reason people don't save today for retirement tomorrow is because it's the
yeah,
future us doesn't exist. We go, it's just
yeah.
one wipe of aluminum on my armpit. So what's the
Yes,
big
right, right,
deal?
right.
It's
Yeah,
just one intake of this food containing heavy metals. It's just one vaccination. It's just one exposure. And what it is, it's an accumulation of things over time. And that's the danger.
yes,
It's not that one latte a day will save for retirement. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that when we look at these incremental changes, it fills my cup. I got a cup here. The more water I put in,
right,
eventually that's going to overflow. And when that
right.
overflows, now I've got symptoms. But because we're going one or two drops at a time, and
Yeah,
it's been months or years that it took to fill this cup up halfway, I
yeah,
now don't recognize the drops are filling it at all.
yeah,
And that's the problem we have. We just don't recognize how it extrapolates. And working in health, I see it. I take medical histories every day from people and I trace back to when they were kids
yeah.
to figure out what's causing those diseases today. Even their parents. Oh, well, turns out your mom actually had Lyme disease. You got it in utero, and here's what happened, blah, blah, blah. And that's how we extrapolate when you
Wow.
already understand it. But most
Yeah,
people don't have that ability.
yeah. Yeah, the causation correlation thing is such a fascinating like conversation, because so you can get pushed in. Whoever has the most authority in the conversation can either say, well, that's not correlative, or it is causative, and so on and so forth. And to me, the diabetes rate and obesity rate, something's going on because things are just so
Mhm.
different than they were in the past. So you have a lot of accomplishments. I mean, as we're talking about, and probably things that are dramatic. As a paramedic, you probably saved human beings' lives that wouldn't have made it had you not been there. In a certain sense, your work in your current work, saving people's lives, if it's not like acute that they're about to die as they come into your office. it's, you're saving them over a period of time. When you would want somebody to think about one of your accomplishments or achievements, what would you like to be tied to? Like, how would you like people to think about you?
Oof. I don't like the word martyrdom because it's kind of stupid and, it's got a lot of negative connotation. But I mean, I'll tell you, the people I respect most right now are
Mhm.
guys like Dr. Joseph McCullough, Dr. Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey, Paul Merrick. These guys who are standing up to the system that is trying to bury them, that would be happy
Yeah,
if their brakes suddenly failed in their car and they disappeared. And that to me is something worth aligning. When we can see the things that are being covered up, the harder things get buried and covered and like skewed in the media, the more I want to work against it. And it's not so much that I want to be looked at as, embracing nature, ancestral health, and, being unbiased and, look at all the things that I've done, all the lives I've saved. It's not so much that. To me, what's important is really the virtue behind it and the mentality behind how I live my life. That I'm not willing to bend to the pressure of the media. I'm not willing to bend to the pressure of maybe being deplatformed. Like whoop dee. There were people who held beliefs that were beaten in camps for it, physically beaten and their family killed. And like that's something. So like losing a TikTok account, whatever. And
right.
so, it's that's what I think is the greatest accomplishment that I think needs to be attached is no matter how my career might change or get threatened, that I'm not willing to bend and comply for money, that I'm not willing to be bribed into saying something I don't believe in, that my convictions are so strong behind what I do that I will die beside them.
Yeah, I
Dramatically
mean,
spoken.
yeah, I mean, okay, thank you, well said. And I, I, I hope that there's maybe someone out there that listens that starts to align the power structures along with what you're talking about, because it's untenable for pretty much everybody. Like insurance companies cannot survive on this trajectory. People, we have a decreasing population in the country. So it's contracting the market base of the people who are currently selling all this stuff that is not serving people well. And so your bravery and willingness to kind of be confront the power structure at some point in time is going to have to recognize that we've gone down roads that are going to have to change. Kaiser Permanente in California was starting to talk about changing the remuneration of doctors that treat diabetes, where they don't start with diet first. And I thought that was an interesting tension between, a large organization with a lot of power who recognize that, like, hey, we need to start to figure out how to reduce costs. And you know I I don't think that's played out altogether, but I thought it was an interesting opportunity. Let's say people wanna maybe they wanna work with you, or maybe they would like to learn more about you. How do they do that?
Well, the easiest way to learn anything would be using either the website or the podcast. My podcast is called Reversible, the Ultimate Gut Health Podcast, and that's
Nice.
spelled Reverse Able, the Ultimate Gut Health Podcast. And you can, of course, head to reverseablepod.com. And there's contact forms there, there's free stuff, there's free gut programs, there's, of course, links to the different guests you can see. And it really is an amazing show. I've been very, very blessed to be able to meet the people I've met, some of the best doctors, health coaches, and minds on earth have come onto the show. We've had
Oh,
Lisa
nice.
Bilyeu from Impact Theory, Dr. Paul Merrick, Peter McCullough, Mindy Pels is coming on here soon. Like just legends in the industry doing what they do. William Lee, Stephen Gundry. It's just been fantastic. So if you guys want to learn about the gut, it's not just gut specific, but it's about how our world affects our gut and how our gut affects us and our world
Mhm.
from a lot of different angles of farming and health and, all kinds of cool stuff. So that's reversiblepod.com is the best place to go for that.
Okay, reversiblepod.com. Well, Josh Desh, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really am grateful that you gave me and gave our listeners a chance to learn about you. And I really encourage everybody to go out and listen to the podcast and begin perhaps the beginning of your mindset shifts and moving in towards your most optimal self possible. So thank you, Josh.
Appreciate you having me, Peter. Thanks.
So today's modern revolutionary is deeply, passionately interested in helping the world, and he's bringing his ideas out there in the face of a lot of opposition and tension. So I think it's inspiring, and I would have it encourage you to bring your ideas to the world, because The modern revolution needs us all.